Hello, welcome to my video on how to avoid a project death march. So in today's video, we'll discuss the causes behind death marches, how teams end up with a death march, essential planning data, not detailed planning, but essential planning data to head off a death march, and then using data in easy negotiation, no PhD required. A project death march is where the project has a deadline and they have no idea if they can meet it or not, and so they put their nose to the grindstone and they work 24/7 to see what happens. One cause, little or no requirements. So the team has a notion in its head of what it should build, called the it. Okay, we're going to build it, whatever it is, and we're going to do it by the deadline. And so the it by the deadline in our head is a good recipe for disaster, because you may have a team of 5 people and they will have a different it in their head, and therefore they're kind of running around doing their best job, but maybe on each other's toes and whatever, and the end result is like, you did what? I have no idea you did that. And so not a good recipe for success. Ambiguous requirements, another common root cause. So the requirement down here is pretty and state-of-the-art and will attract tourists. Again, that could be anything from an Eiffel Tower, Leaning Tower of Pisa, and the Taj Mahal. And so each one is actually pretty, state-of-the-art in its time for sure, and definitely will attract tourists. But which one are we building? And if we don't have a more clear requirement, then we're going to be running around building one of them, and it could be the wrong one. So in that particular case, we have a couple of choices. We could either give a range for the estimate, is between here and here, kind of A to B, okay? Or we actually could then pick a deadline in the range and say, there's this deadline here, or this kind of budget here, and this is the scope we're going to do. So it's clarifying what can and cannot be done by that particular point in the schedule, or the deadline we've been given. So we'll come back and revisit that in a little while about how to resolve the ambiguous requirement issue. Now, a second set of causes are these ones here. I've met teams that actually have good requirements and are still under chaos, okay, or in chaos with the death march. So here's their backlog of requirements, or the requirements list. But if you look at their schedule, there is nothing in these boxes here. They're completely empty, okay, or what I will call blank, okay. And basically, they are running as fast as they can to get whatever they can get done in the list, quick as they can. But they really have no idea how long things will take, what they can do by the deadline, what kind of fits, what doesn't fit. They're just going to head down fast as they can, and when they pop their head up at the deadline, they kind of see what's going to done. And they either ask for forgiveness, or they say the rest will be done later, and they really have no idea. So here we have no task breakdown, no assumptions defined. Estimates are limited to duration or the deadline. We're assuming we're 100% available, which we may not be, and could be resources not assigned correctly, or they're being pulled elsewhere, and therefore we don't have the resources we need. All that kind of stuff is going to be ignored, and we're going to go heads down and do whatever we can. So if you look at these two lists here, the first one about requirements and this one here about planning estimation data, they really kind of points to the team of what they could be doing to get better data, not what other people kind of around them should be doing. Customers are not going to do this. Big boss is not going to do it. The team kind of does it. So the magic of this is the team has to come up with better data, and then they're going to have to use the data for their purpose scheme, for their scheduling and whatever, which we'll discuss in a couple of seconds. So the first thing I recommend is the team has a fairly strict or useful kind of set of steps they go through to derive data. Okay, they firstly figure out requirements. Again, don't get too worried about it being perfect. Just a first kind of high-level set of requirements would be adequate, just something. Okay, and then when we look at tasks and estimation, again, a high-level set of tasks and a high-level set of estimates. The risk log, we'll go look at that too, and then kind of using the data over here, kind of data, into the schedule, and then we learn how to negotiate. Negotiate in this context here does not mean getting a PhD from Harvard in negotiation. It means coming up with options which we can then show people kind of data or facts, and then they can pick and choose the options. That's what negotiation means in our context here. So the essence here is on the team having data and the team knowing how to get data, that they should have it, and kind of how to use it. Now some teams will plan too much. Now I'm a big proponent on planning, but not planning too much. And the idea is going to hit this kind of target here. Now if we have time on the x-axis and the benefit of planning on the y, a lot of teams will go on and plan until they become nauseous, okay, like we are sick of it. And what they learn is don't plan again. It's sickening, okay? It's going to be too much, okay? And what they don't realize, or they don't realize quick enough, is that they have gone way beyond this point of the diminishing returns. And so we want to recognize where this point is. Typically, if there's no more to discuss, or there are questions we cannot answer, then we're going to get to this point here. If you're an agile team typically has like a 4-week duration, like an iteration. They could be spending 1 day of 4 weeks doing planning, or maybe a 2-week iteration. They could be spending a half a day, or maybe even less on planning. So this is not a great deal amount of time. You can spend less if the work is going to be easier, or a bit more if it's more complicated. But gives you a kind of rough idea of where you are going to stop planning. But when you recognize there are things you don't know, or things you need to investigate, then you will stop, do some work, and then come back when you know more, and then kind of factor those new things into your plan. So realize here we're not coding, we're planning. So a lot of teams will not want to do planning because it's not coding. They feel like they're wasting their time. What they're really doing is buying information. Okay, so they're investing time to buy information so they can organize their life better, organize it better than a death march. And so time equals 0, or invested time equals 0. Seat of the pants, don't be surprised by anything. I'm not telling people not to do this, but don't be surprised if you do it. If you really spend 0 time planning something, vacation, schedule, project, barbecue event, whatever it is, then do not be surprised by whatever happens. Okay, if the barbecue has no barbecue and the vacation has no beach, okay, then yeah, that's what you got by investing a whole 0 in that event. Okay, one person's opinion, doable, particularly if that person is very knowledgeable about the project and they can come up with good data and they have good experience. Occasionally you find people that are very experienced in this and they can come up with good data. But I typically don't recommend that because one person typically doesn't know what all the issues actually are. Team is preferred. The team alone, just discussing numbers, could have many different opinions. So yes, the team is involved there, which is good. But let's have a better way to organize the team in the discussion. Planning poker is a little bit better than that. So we're discussing now the backlog or requirements list and the estimates. Okay. That's an essential planning poker. Not difficult, but kind of useful. And I would recommend one step beyond that, where we're discussing the project and then we're clarifying effort, tasks, and size or points and assumptions. Okay. So as we discuss the issues, we're actually writing down some of the key issues here. We don't have to kind of rehash them again. That is actually called Delphi. You can look it up on Wikipedia. It's defined up there. Don't panic about the name of it. It's just a team discussion like planning poker that kind of records this other data and clarifies that kind of stuff. So I think if you're in this kind of range here as a team discussion, you're doing fine and you are getting the team on the same page, clarifying issues and deriving data at the same time. Some teams go one step beyond that point. They could be kind of using a couple of methods, velocity and historical data as one method, maybe Delphi as a second one, or maybe they're using planning poker and historical data for 2 methods. And so if you really care about the numbers and the estimates being accurate, you might come at it from 2 different ways and then kind of clarify kind of what you ended up with. But I think if you're in this kind of range here, you're good. So the first thing to do is get a good list of requirements. These are ambiguous one-liners called a backlog. In the Agile world, any kind of backlog or requirements list will be adequate. They're good enough estimation. they're not really good enough for doing coding yet because they're too ambiguous. But to get some idea of points, or maybe hours or hours plus points, they're probably good enough, but it's better than nothing. Okay, so the idea is better than nothing, and so from that we can then A, come up with an estimate, and B, come up with kind of priority, maybe A's, and then B's, and then kind of C. C is kind of like a wish list. So if there was a major deadline or kind of a stopping point, we could then figure out maybe the C's go away and get delayed, and we do the A's and B's. So some kind of notion of priority there would be good. Now, if you have requirements that are ambiguous, like the pretty state-of-the-art and will attract tourists example from before, then you might give a range. This is an ambiguous requirement, and you can capture ambiguity as a range of estimates, A to B, okay? Where you promise not to exceed B. This is the largest number, and you're likely to probably not hit A. It's going to be bigger than that, okay? You might hit A, but you give a range, and the range comprehends ambiguity. Now, if you can convince the management and customer of that, they tend to kind of like that, okay? Because they recommend, or they recognize rather, that the requirements are ambiguous. And then you promise after 2 weeks to come up with a new range, C through D, okay? After you've discovered some more things and kind of tried a few things out, and maybe you clarify it one more time and come up with kind of E through kind of F, okay? So bit by bit, you bring in the range to kind of a tighter range as you discover more. As long as you don't exceed B, the biggest number, then the big boss and customer could be okay with this because they know what they give you is ambiguous, particularly if you point it out to them. And then as long as you don't exceed their bigger budget, they could be quite okay with A, you keeping in a range, and B, you promising to come up with a new range every couple of weeks to kind of clarify what you've now learned. Now, if you have good data, estimation data, you could apply velocity. So a lot of good teams, particularly mature teams, process mature teams, will have a unit in mind. It could be points, complexity, number of screens, number of features, number of interfaces, number of databases, some kind of count. And they could say there's 15 new features, 4 big, 5 small, and whatever tiny. And given our historical data, we know this kind of counts here, 25 on average, gives an effort number. So they actually could use previous data to then come up with a quick effort estimate. They may go back to the drawing board and come up with a new estimate over here, like pure labor hours to do work, and they're going to compare and check, and that will give them a final prediction. That would be a pretty robust way to come up with good data at the end. If you have no velocity data, you're going to starting out, then basically estimate effort and record size, and then bit by bit kind of correlate the two together. So maybe after 3 months you know that 10 points in your world equals 3 months, or 15 points equals 1 month, and you can then use that data next time to kind of speed up your estimation activity. Okay. So it's a thing you kind of build up over time. But if you have nothing, then you actually can do effort at the beginning and get a fairly good estimate out of that. Now, next step I think in the flow is to come up with risk. So let's look at risk. What could go wrong? Again, we as a team are looking at data to kind of help our situation out, and then kind of use that kind of to help the customer and big boss out too. Now, if one of the tasks was Aaron codes XYZ in 5 days using a new API from Team A, I think that task would itself kind of show you what could be risky. Aaron could be a risk, okay? XYZ could be a risk. Who's never done? People have never done XYZ before. Brand new, therefore risky. 5 days, like really 5 days for XYZ? No kidding. Okay. New would imply risk. API would imply risk. Okay. Interface to the outside world, and then Team A. Oh, we know about Team A. They're terrible. Therefore, by default, risky. And don't say that to people because it's just the thought in your head, not out loud. So your team will come up with a list brainstormed, potential problems, not guaranteed to occur. They're not problems actually now, but they could occur. And so brainstorm there. Again, covers the gamut from vendor, customer, technical, team, resourcing, whatever issues. put them on the list. Consequence, how bad would they be if they were to occur? So we're going to get on the same page about how bad it actually is. The consequence discussion tells you kind of the impact number. So now we give impact, how bad it would be on a 1 to 10 scale. 10 is very large, would wipe the team out. 1 is hardly noticeable, and therefore we get a range over here. Each number gives to kind of determine the impact of the risk item. Likelihood, 10, very likely to occur, but not guaranteed. That would be a problem, not a potential problem. And then 1 is very unlikely. Again, we give it a 10 through a 1 number. We can then multiply them together to get priority. We might decide to focus on the top half only, 54 through 100 in our case, and then we come up with the mitigation actions. The first one is to reduce likelihood and make it less likely to occur. So these are typically smaller, proactive, and early actions we do. And then the impact, typically a backup plan. If we can't make it go away, the risk go away, then what is our backup plan to go to if the risk actually occurs? So we kind of focus over here more because they're cheaper, earlier, proactive actions, but we want to have at least an idea of a backup plan over here. So this whole table would take between half and 1 hour to kind of do with your team discussing things, and it would then from that data kind of know what to go focus on to mitigate risk next. Now, the magical part of negotiation, the one you do not need a PhD from Harvard to do. Okay, so the first concept here, we have data. Okay, this is our primary data. We then put the data into a schedule, and if we're clever, we end up with a schedule A. So schedule option A, 3 months in our timeline, month 1, 2, and 3 for our release, and we can figure out from our estimation data what fits. These things fit, these things kind of fit. This is big, goes over here, fits over here, and we can figure out from our data and our team availability what would fit to figure out maybe our release. But if we're really clever, we'll come up with option B. So we know the big boss wants really the first major requirement done and a few of the minor ones. Okay. So option B, we're going to show a schedule that kind of shows that. Maybe some of these ones are over here somewhere. Option C, maybe the customer wants everything done, and so we say we can do 3 months where everything's kind of done, the big ones and the minor ones. It's a longer schedule, maybe 4 or 5 months, and option maybe D. So if we use our data, come up with 3 or 4 options, and then when we go into our negotiation, people can pick and choose and combine the options. So negotiation means pick from option. Okay. And so when we go through the discussion, we have valid options to pick from. They're all achievable. We have data to support them. And we may decide to combine them together, a bit of D, a bit of C, a bit of A, which is just fine. We can build a new option. And then basically we can discuss people with the customer and figure out the kind of new commitment. So now we are setting ourselves up for success and helping the customer and the big boss do the same thing. Now, a lot of teams will avoid all negotiation because it implies conflict, and because they don't want to be loved any less in life, okay, and then they don't want to have conflict, because conflict means the guy may love you less, okay, because they're arguing with you or discussing. And so engineers often kind of choose the engineering path because they're trying to avoid confrontation, okay, and negotiation sounds like that in spades, and we want to avoid that. And so the option they choose is to kind of say yes and hide, which is kind of why they end up in the death march situation. Okay, this being a kind of now a sad face, okay, like a very sad face, okay. Heck, go for it, very, very sad face, okay. Now another option is to be more proactive, okay, happy face. Basically, we have data for negotiation. We focus on what they really care about. I'll explain in a couple of seconds. We present data and options. That's our negotiation in essence, and we then get agreement on that with known risk. This requires the team to get out of its office and actually have data and talk to people. Okay? This is no longer going to be working very well. It hasn't worked any well up to now. And so we have to have data and get out of our office and then talk to people. Maybe you pick a spokesperson of your team, the PM, the Scrum Master, whoever, that actually can talk and talk nicely and do the discussion with you there as a team member. So let's discuss this negotiation principle. Basically, here's an analogy. Person A, what they want to do in a library is have the window shut because they want to avoid the draft. The window shut is not the care about. The care about is the benefit they get from it. Avoid draft. Their papers are being blown around. Person B, their position is to have the window open because they want to keep it kind of cool, keep themselves kind of cool. And so they don't really care about the window per se. They care about the benefit of the window being, in this case, open. So you want to focus on the care about of the big boss. Why do you care about the deadline? What do you get from it? Okay, and they may say better revenue, early time to market, big competitor, keep customer A happy. There's a benefit they're going to get out of the deadline. The deadline is not the key point here. It is what they get out of it. So you discussing with them their interest or their why helps you figure out what the end goal actually is, which is not the deadline itself. Now, we have option A and option B here, but now we can have option C, okay? Because we know what they really care about, option C could be to open a window in an adjacent room. And so basically, we've come up with a better option here than the first two non-compatible options of A and B. Now, if we're clever with our data, we may have option D and option E and whatever, F. And because we now know what they care about, revenue, or keep customer A happy, or basically meet in a beat competition with the central feature, we know what their interest really is. We can help with them look at the options, option A through D, and figure out which ones are the best ones to kind of achieve the end goal. Now, there could be some combinations here. They want option A and they want option D combined together, called option E or option F. As long as you have data to support that, you're good to go. Now, if you do get pushback on this and they say do option A and B together in half the time, then you want to remind them to look at the data. You want them to kind of go through the data and figure out themselves kind of what is going on and what they recommend. And they and you quickly realize they have no idea. So if you are gentle about it and kind of nice and say, let's go through the data one more time and figure out what we can change or not change, what the data says, you realize quickly, and they do too, that you're going to hold your ground. The data is actually valid, and they really have no idea at all what's going to change, and they will bit by bit back off. You are training them and educating them how to deal with data. It may be a bit uncomfortable the first time, but bit by bit, if you're clever about it and focus on what they really care about, okay, their interest over here, then A, you'll get what you want the first, second time, and B, you'll train them how to behave the next time. Okay? And so it is a kind of a short, medium, and long-term approach to kind of get them on board about how you deal with things now and make things more factual kind of based as you do your schedules. So in the flow, we have been focusing on data, these ones here, to kind of get good data for the purpose of negotiation and avoid major death march situations. Now, I'm not going to cover this one over here in detail now. There'll be a future video on that. Most people kind of do tracking pretty well as they stand now. So the idea is to take a step out from the deadline, go figure out what the deadline means, what the data actually is, and then come back together and figure out how to kind of do this. If you're given a deadline already, it seems kind of somewhat immovable, don't give up. Okay, the whole purpose is to then figure out what the risk is by giving them the data and saying, well, the risk is we will not finish these things over here. So we can commit to it, or we can pretend to commit to it, but actually what's going to end up being is that you'll get these things, they're pretty obvious, but these things down here probably won't get. It's a risk. So long as you're okay with that, we're going to keep on going with our deadline. And because the big boss actually wants these things over here, he or she may actually back off and say, well, what would it then cost? So you've got to have data, and you've got to be fairly firm with it in a constructive kind of fashion. So thank you for watching the video. Any comments and questions, please post down below and I'll be happy to answer those for you. There's a bunch of freeware up there, articles and videos on our website on the topics of requirements, estimation, planning. Go take a look at them. There is a full-scale class on this topic area with further details, actually a lot more details on these kind of steps, available on the first link. Bye-bye.